Stay with us if you can. We want to bring in our Bulls and Bears.
Lee Gallagher, Scott Blyer, Gary Kaltbaum, and Peter Schiff are joining us to talk about all of this. Okay, Lee, Ben Bernanke has found God. He's talking about inflation suddenly.
Sure, he's got inflation on the brain, and he's right, too. And I agree with what Michelle was saying. I mean, if he had said this 6 months ago, can you imagine, everybody would have gone crazy if he had remotely signaled that he was close to stopping cutting interest rates, which is all he's saying here. He's not talking about raising interest rates just yet. I do think that the Fed thinks that the global credit crisis was the greater risk to the economy. We had Timothy Geithner in our offices this week, and he said, it takes a series of serial sustained mistakes to not control inflation, and we've got it under control.
Well, and Gary, to Lee's point, a year ago, a lot of people, including folks at the Fed, were wondering whether this subprime thing would be contained to just a small segment of the mortgage population, would never spill over to financials.
Look, I just go to my biggest problem with the Fed. I think they're great at reporting the news after it's already happened. They've been wrong most of the time. And I've got to tell you, for him to have a straight face to say that inflation's only in the 3% range when DuPont just raised prices 20% and everything we buy has skyrocketed, and let's not even mention oil prices, is just absolutely insane. It flies in the face of anything we're seeing in the real world.
Peter, I know that you would argue certainly that the very policies that the Fed put into place to deal with growth, i.e. cutting rates and adding liquidity, have caused this
sure.
inflation.
Ben Bernanke is an inflation creator. He's not an inflation fighter. But a couple of interesting points. About 6 months ago, when Congressman Ron Paul specifically told
Your
Ben
man,
Bernanke,
by the way,
right, that the weak dollar was causing prices to rise in the United States, Ben Bernanke said no. He said the weak dollar only hurts Americans if they travel abroad. Yesterday, he changed his mind and actually acknowledged that the weak dollar is causing prices to rise and causing inflation expectations to rise. But then today, when he made these nonsensical statements at Harvard, I mean, first of all, he said, he said that we don't have the wage price spiral like we had in the 70s. Well, first of all, the wage price spiral didn't create the inflation in the 70s. It resulted from it. Wages rose as a result of inflation. The problem now, and the reason it's worse, is we have prices spiraling out of control, but not wages. Right. So it makes the inflation even worse for the average American because his paycheck isn't rising.
Although part of that has led to an increase in productivity.
Let me make a prediction right here. Now that the Fed is worried about inflation for the first time, commodity prices have peaked, and they'll be coming down. We have probably peaked in terms of prices of commodities. Now, this all has to work through the economy, and it's going to be very painful, but I don't think the Fed can raise rates for a long time, maybe years, because now the Fed owns $400 or $500 billion worth of junk paper that was sold to them by the investment banks.
And
so he's stuck.
Michelle, I'm with Scott on that. I think that they are in no position, because of the position they put themselves in, to start raising rates. They may stand pat, which I believe is what the Fed funds futures pits are betting.
Well, actually, the Fed funds futures are still pricing in a rate hike by year end and pretty aggressive hikes in 09.
But for June 24th, I'm talking about.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But I have to say, I think the idea that they'll be hiking by year end is also very aggressive. I mean, it's sort of along the lines of what you're all saying. The position that they're in, the elections on the margin, I think all these things come together to argue for the Fed standing pat and having to wait longer than perhaps would be recommended.
Scott, amend something.
Let me just make a correction.
The Fed didn't buy.
They don't own it.
Yeah.
They're being they're it's a lending facility. But the problem is, who are they going to sell this to at the end of the day in a year or 2 years? This is a borrowing facility. They're holding this paper.
UBS is able to sell some of this paper at a discount, at a heavy discount, but they're able to sell it.
Okay, so who are they going to sell it to? But that's a whole other issue. But it is a lending facility.
It goes back to a bigger point here, whether the Fed has control of anything they do. I mean, we're seeing Lehman blowing up here, even though everybody's been borrowing tens of billions of dollars. I just don't think the Fed has their pulse on anything, and I think they're just late in the game.
Peter, last word.
Another big thing that Bernanke said, he said that we're not as dependent on oil anymore. It's a smaller part of our GDP. That's a classic mistake that everybody makes because now we import all the things we used to make. Back in the 1970s, we didn't have a huge trade deficit. Now we do because all the oil that's used to make the stuff we consume is used abroad, but it's in our trade deficit and it's hurting us.
Here's a look at what's still on tap here on Listen to him. South Dakota voters approved plans to build the first oil refinery in the U.S. in more than 30 years. The project faces environmentalist opposition, but Texas-based Hyperion Group insists its $10 billion refinery is a step toward energy independence.
Would more refineries in the U.S. change the equation at the gas pump? Let's ask our Bulls and Bears panel. You know, there used to be the old NIMBY, not in my backyard rule, but apparently the folks in this neighborhood said, yeah, please put it in my backyard. We can use the revenue.
Well, I don't know if they said that, but
it was an overwhelming vote to the positive.
It's a big step. It still has to get approved for air pollution controls. It's a lengthy process, and they still have to build a pipeline. This is designed for oil coming in from Canada, but there's no pipeline to get it there. So, you know, this is still a long way away from being a reality, but it's an important step. I mean, no refineries built in 30 years is a big problem.
Yeah, but would that bring down the price of gasoline at the pump, Peter?
Well, no, prices are going to go up regardless of whether or not we build more refineries. If we have more refineries, they won't go up as much because we won't have to import as much refined oil as we do now. But the problem is you can't will these refineries into existence. It's going to take a long time to build them. It's going to cost a lot of money. And where's the money going to come from?
Well, but Gary, you know, when the will is there, we find the way here in America. And the vote was 3,900 to 2,800. So it was an overwhelming vote for the community. Hyperion certainly wants to go ahead and do this thing. So it's going to get done, don't you think?
In years to come. That's the problem with all this. There's already several lawsuits against the vote for what happened by the environmentalists as well as others here. And that's been the big problem with the refiners. It's just for the last 30 years, it's too much to put them up. You have to deal with the regulatory environment, how much you have to spend on that. And you end up with this, and you probably got 3 or 4 years and a lot more votes before anything does get done. It's almost not worth it.
And we should also clarify that while the vote was lopsided, you know, the people who were closest to it in these rural areas were adamantly opposed. You know, David, you bring up NIMBY. When I was out at the Wall Street Journal Economics Conference, they called it banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So
right. Of course, how are we going to run the jets to get to those conferences if we do that?
Well, listen, it doesn't change the metrics for gas at the pump. Not at all. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's plenty of gas at the pump. We don't no lines like in the 70s.
Controls.
We have outsourced our refineries offshore in Aruba, in Saudi Arabia. There's plenty of refined product. And I don't know if you've noticed, but from $80 to $120, basically, gas prices didn't rise while oil was rising. It's not until oil got to $120 that gas prices really rose. But the spreads really gotten tight, and refineries couldn't make money.
I want to get back to your point, Gary Kalpon, because it's kind of shocking when lawsuits can overwhelm the will of the people. And that's what you're saying is happening here.
Well, look, this has been a fight that just didn't start today. It's been going on for many a moon. Anytime anybody even brings up, we want to do something about the oil crisis, they go, do something else. There's no way you're building here. And you said it best with this banana thing. There's already 3 lawsuits on this. There's going to be 10 more lawsuits. They're going to come down the pipe. Nobody wants it in their backyard, whether it's because they don't want to kill the raccoons or the elk or the antelope.
All right, thanks,
so we'll
guys.
bring back the horse and carriage. Thanks, everybody.
Well, you think your gas bill is high?
Too bad. Well, we round out our show today with what you need to know. And Lee, we begin with you. What do we need to know?
Well, there's a new movie coming out called WALL-E from Pixar. This is going to be a big hit for Disney, which now owns Pixar, of course. And it also marks the first time that Disney actually tapped Apple's design studio to create the character. So when you see it, if you notice that Eve, the main woman robot, looks like an iPod, that's the reason why.
It's not Wally the walrus. It's
not
Wally
He's an old
the
school
robot.
kind of old mechanical clunker, but Eve is the beauty. And it's from Apple.
All right. Who is he, by the way? You know the voices?
I don't know the voice.
Oh, Liz, there's a part for you.
Scott, what do we need to know?
Well, Disney made a 52-week high today. But look, Lehman Brothers is the battleground stock in the financials today. The news has been all around it, rumors swirling. At risk of being wrong, and I don't think I am, this company's not going out of business. And the shorts have stayed too long. They should cover. After every market mayhem, the rumors are this company is going to go out of business, and they are rough and tumble. They're going to make it through.
You're going to put your money up against Einhorn?
I'm scared to buy financials, but I think the shorts should cover here. They've stayed too long. They're going to overstay their welcome if they stay any longer.
Wagon circled a bit with Merrill upgrading it.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Aren't they buying
Gary,
back their
what
own
do we
stock?
need to know?
There are many people predicting that housing is stabilizing and is going to be better at the end of this year. I'm seeing the exact opposite. There's very tough to get money, and just as a little